All right, please welcome back to the channel my longtime good friend and fellow Tomcat RIO. Hey, Joe Parsons. Hey, Joe, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to be back.
So let's remind folks who didn't see the previous episodes, because it's been actually a few years since you were on, but you and I have known each other since the late 80s, early 90s. I relieved you, thanks to your hands-on massaging of these orders, as the editor of Approach magazine at the Naval Safety Center in January of 1989. You had to get to VF-32 to do your department head tour at that time. So I'm wearing my VF-32 shirt that I just bought from the VFA-32 gang down at the air show a couple of months ago. The Gypsies are still alive and kicking, flying the Super Hornet now, the two-seat Super Hornet, the F. So I took your job. You went on to be a Gypsy aboard Kennedy. Did you guys go right on cruise, or when did you go on cruise?
Well, we were actually out at Nellis Air Force Base as an adversary for the Air Force Fighter Weapons School. They wanted us to be Iranian Tomcats and be wily bogies. And you remember Chewy, Tyler Davenport, we were sitting together, and the intel officer walked in to the briefing room and says, "Hey, Iraq just invaded Kuwait." And Chewy goes, "Where's that?" And we all had a good laugh. So we went up to the map. Everybody started gathering, going, "Oh, well, that won't involve us," because we were like the National Guard at that point. We were getting ready to go on cruise early that year. And then all of a sudden the peace dividend hit, and they said, "You guys just go home." And the squadron was actually going apart. They were sending everybody on to other orders. So we weren't even a full squadron. The next day, we got, "You guys are coming back tomorrow, and you are deploying Monday. You've got to CQ and do 14 engine changes in the next 48 hours while you're doing FCLPs." And I was the maintenance officer, so we were like, "Wow, we're going to have to work 24 hours. Nobody's going home." And you know how hard it is to get C9 airlifts, NALO. All of a sudden, they started showing up at our airfield. We're like, "Whoa, I think we're going to war." It was a no notice deployment. And I found out later that Kennedy had already disgorged all the ammunition, everything, because they were going to go into an SRA yard period. So they were told, "Get up to Yorktown and load it all back up." It was crazy. We also had to sweep the jets, make sure all the raw gear. I'd learned that in VF 102, that all our little receivers for the RWR gear, you're not supposed to paint them over, but the corrosion guys always do. So there's people that can come in, can sweep it and say it's not working, and they did that all that weekend. Then we were off and running to the Middle East, and which set us up for Saratoga was already there. They beat us by about, I think, 10 days, something like that. And so they were already in the Red Sea when we arrived.
So people know what Desert Storm was. You guys entered the Red Sea and you're part of a thing called Desert Shield. So what was that all about?
This is probably the most epic deployment since the 1972 mass deployment off Southeast Asia. Every available carrier was being sortied. So there was going to be initially 2 carriers in the Red Sea, which is west of Iraq, and then they were putting 3 carriers in the Persian Gulf, coming from Westpac. So we knew something was up. We could tell that the president was serious, that we were probably going to go to war. And people, the whole way over, we were scrambling, doing mission planning, trying to figure out, okay, what kind of airplanes do they have? Really interestingly, somebody that became pretty famous later, Rat Slade, went up in a VF 103 jet off the Sarah and actually went up to Europe, and this was very classified at the time, but now it's like, openly known, is they flew against the MiG-29 and some of the French jamming pods that they knew the Iraqis had. And when we arrived in the Red Sea, they came over and debriefed us on what they saw as far as ranges and effect on our radars. So if we had to fight these guys, so we knew it was pretty serious. We were getting all sorts of deep intel. And one of the things that they were telling us about that really got our eyebrows up was that the French had provided Mirage F-1s to the Iraqi Air Force with the Exocet missile, which had done some pretty significant damage to the British, including sinking ships in the Falklands. So now the Iraqis had the same missile, and one day they hit the Stark. And when I was at the safety center, they brought those guys over afterwards because they almost lost the Stark. It got hit by two Exocets fired by the Iraqis, and it came out later that it wasn't a Mirage F1. It was at night, and what the French had done to help train the Iraqi pilots is they took a Falcon 50 business jet and put the Mirage F1 radar, the radome and the radar on the nose, kind of like we had an A6 nose on the front of a Gulfstream that the A6 intruder guys used to train on. And initially in the Tomcat, they had a A3 Sky Warrior with a AUG-9 and a Tomcat nose on it that I found out recently, all the initial Tomcat RIOs all trained in that. So you could have the instructor standing right by them because these radars were, pretty sophisticated at the time. So they had that, and found out is the Iraqis said, well, it's not just for training. We're going to use it to go out at night because the single seat guys didn't like to fly at night. So they would go out with a trained navigator at night and go out and hunt Iranian tankers. And that one night, the jury's still out. Did they really intend to hit a tanker, or did they mistake the Stark for a tanker, or did they intentionally hit the Stark? Because the Stark was, they knew every night this airplane would come out and look for a tanker. And as soon as it got one, it would shoot and it would go home. And they were warning it on the radio, hey, you're approaching a USS warship. And they saw it turn around and go home. I debriefed the guy. He says, yeah, we thought we were okay. He turned around after we told him to go home. Well, what they didn't realize is how far that missile could go. The guy went home because he had launched two Exocets and he was going home, and their radar did not pick it up. So they weren't even at GQ when they got slammed by two successive missiles, which almost broke the ship in half. And it was really a superlative damage control effort to save that ship. So that was only, I believe, in 1987. So it was only 3 years prior. So it was still fresh in everybody's memory. It was fresh in mine. And our intel guys, the same guy that told us Kuwait had been invaded, came in and said, hey, they're really worried that they're going to use that against us, either in the Persian Gulf or maybe even in the Red Sea, and try to come through Jordan, because we found out that the Iraqis and the Jordanians were, if they weren't bosom buddies, the Iraqis would operate out of Jordanian air bases. So they thought there was a threat that they could sneak through Jordan and come down in the airways and attack us in the Red Sea. Upon arrival, we were flying Combat Air Patrol cap stations in the northern reaches of the Red Sea. There was always two Tomcats up there with an Air Force tanker, and they would stay up there 24/7. And there were surface shooters. There were the nuclear-powered cruisers. We still had those. I think they were California class. Those were up there, and they were there to protect the two carriers that were south of that. And that's what set up. They were always watching that threat sector, and there was I call it a sky bridge of transports coming from the United States into Saudi Arabia. And it was literally, they had mobilized the whole reserve fleet. There were all sorts of airplanes from C-5s to 747s, you name it, were coming over the Red Sea from west to east in this sky bridge, bringing troops and supplies into Saudi Arabia every 3 minutes, literally. So part of the cap station's job was to delouse those airplanes to make sure nobody else had sneaked in that way, which going west to east is probably not such a threat, but I remember intercepting those at all time of day and night. We knew there was a threat. We were on guard for it, but there was so many unknowns about operating over there. Should we fly low? Should we fly high? We were already getting ready to practice strikes against Iraq. They're called mirror image, where we would get every available airplane and launch towards Iraq, fly the same route, same that we would fly on day one of the war. And with the same strike leads, we would do that with Saratoga, dual strikes every few days. And then we'd fly right towards the Iraqi border. And then when we'd flip back like a mirror and fly the rest of the mission into Saudi Arabia, deep into the desert. So we'd simulate because these missions would take 4, 5, sometimes 6 hours, which is not usual for the Air Wing. It's a lot of tanking, but the Air Force, a lot of it was getting used to the Air Force tankers and where they were and working out the procedures with them because they like to talk on the radio. We do not. And they came out to work with us, and we said, we're not talking. And so we worked that out. We were kind of surprised because they like control from top down. We kind of break it all the way down to the pretty much, as you know, the section level, minimal comms, and a lot of that is from Top Gun. But that's just the way the Navy operates. We like to do zip lip.
So a lot of moving parts, as you've described, 3 carriers in the Red Sea, 3 carriers in the Gulf. Going into the Gulf proper, as we've talked about on the channel before, was a new phenomenon. My first cruise on Indy, North Arabian Sea, did not risk going through the Strait of Hormuz and into the Gulf. It was only later, after Desert Storm, that I actually went into the Gulf. Heavy tankers, that was sort of a new thing as well. We're starting to do jointness because we have to get to the strike objectives. They're flying over Saudi Arabia. So multi-carrier ops, as you've described, tension on arrival because of the precedent 3 years later with the strike on USS Stark. So TAOs are in what we call high PRF mode, very much concerned about a sort of backdoor sneak attack kind of a thing. So Desert Shield was kind of the warm-up, as you've described, for Desert Storm, but it also had its own immediate concern tactical matrices as you went along. So let's talk about the day of. So you man up on the flight deck of John F. Kennedy VF-32. You man up an F-14A with a really new, and I mean even by new guy standards, the guy you were flying with was very new, an ensign. Talk to us about Jasper.
So Jasper, great guy. I tell you, he had several thousand hours flying banners and bank checks across the country. And we had just started flying together. And he had come to a program where they actually did not commission you till you got your wings. So he was like super junior. So he's still an ensign by the time he hit the fleet, and he had just gotten there. So everything was new, and every flight was almost like a rag hop because that's what he was used to, was flying with a rag instructor. And so, but that was okay. It ended up that day that for whatever reason, we were by ourselves. They were letting us fly in country every day and do low levels or just, grab gas. It was a revelation to us when we arrived in the Red Sea because there, sitting over top of the carrier 24/7, was a KC 135, courtesy of the Air Force, and gas, courtesy of Saudi Arabia, who could refine JP5, which is the gas that we like to use aboard the ships because of the higher flash point, which usually the Air Force did not have. That was important to the ship because they didn't like to take airplanes down the hangar bay if you had taken on JP4.
Let me stop you there. So, because you brought up something I had absolutely forgotten. Saudis paid for the gas. So all the heavy tanker gas was free. As the OPSO, that was super good news. So you wanted to use as much Saudi gas because you weren't going through your OPTAR. Your sortie cost was lower because the gas you took from the Saudis didn't cost you any money. So let's back up. You man up with Jasper. What was your mission when you banged off the cat? And you mentioned you went in country. When you say in country, you mean Saudi Arabia.
Yes, we went feet dry. The Saudis were awesome. They said, "Hey, don't go down near Medina." They had a few sites: Medina, Jeddah. They okay, don't fly down there, but you can fly anywhere else you want. You can fly as low as you want. You can fly as fast as you want. We're like, holy cow! We had just come from Nellis, where there's great flying, but there's still a lot of rules. It was the most amazing training. My whole career, that was at sort of like not the twilight, but the near end of my career. I had almost 2,000 hours in the Tomcat, and I had never had the luxury of gas ever, and on cruise. And all of a sudden, you take off and you went up to the 135. If you were going to stay in the Red Sea, there was one right overhead orbiting. And but if you were going to go do practice strikes or go in country, there was a huge tanker track, two of them, prune and raisin tracks over the middle of the desert, and there was another one up Strawberry up by the Iraqi border, and you could take all the cash you wanted, as much as you wanted, before you did your mission and after your mission. So we had a ton of gas. It meant that all of a sudden we're going, wow. Instead of flying it, my notional number that sticks in my head was we would fly around 220 knots, and that was pretty much hanging on the blades to conserve gas. It was our best at about 20,000 feet, and that got us the best fuel economy. But during Desert Shield, we were up at 400 knots minimum all the time. We used realistic bingos. We said we're always going to have at least 10,000 pounds of gas in case we have a vector. So we had gone in and done a outrageous low level. And I can't remember, for life of me, I cannot remember why we were by ourselves, but we were. We came back out, and I had said, well, let's since there were no restrictions, I said, we got a little time. Let's go up to the northern end of the Red Sea, which was ended up being very fortuitous because we head up there and let's do a little sightseeing. And I was, me as a photographer was like, let's go check out the beaches and the backgrounds. I want to get some good pictures, coming up, because we had literally, this was like the end of August, so we had just gotten there and still getting used to the area. And so, but when you were, as soon as you went feet dry, you checked in with the E2, and he left you alone. Um, and so we weren't really talking to anyone. And so we're heading back west. And so we check in on the radio, which is usually just as quiet, just to check in going feet wet. And I immediately hear the voice of Stu Miller, who had been in 102 with me. He's a fellow RIO, and then he went to the safety center as the admiral's aide. So I'd been with that guy for years, and I knew his voice, and he was like at least two octaves louder than normal, or higher, I guess is the right term.
What was Stu's job at that time?
It was funny. I saw him in the chow hall, and he goes, "Hey, yeah, I'm a TAO," and I go, "Oh yeah." He goes, "Yeah, come on by." He was really anxious for me to come by, so I this is also fortuitous. So I went in, and on his next watch, and he showed me what he did, and he showed me this great new software they had, because we were talking about these airliners that are like unbelievable, and he was showing me the stream of airliners and the fact that they had new software, because not only was the Stark thing a big deal was the Vincennes, the Navy Aegis cruiser that shot down an Iranian airliner because they thought it was attacking when it was actually just flying on the airways. So after that tragedy, they came out with some software that showed them where the airways were, and supposedly he said, yeah, he really believed in it. He goes, yeah, they've got every airplane on here. We know what, nobody can sneak in on us because this shows us, hey, that's this airplane that's supposed to be there. So, that stuck in my head. And so he showed me all that stuff. So, and he's a smart guy, and he's pretty cool, calm, and collected. And so for him to be so excited talking so fast, saying warning red, weapons tight. When I heard that, I just went, holy cow, something's going on. They've seen something that they don't like. I surmised from the chatter that there's something was coming down at high speed uh, towards the top of the Red Sea, and they were reacting to it. And they were launching additional DLI to deal with it. And there's no way I could figure out, well, what happened to the cap? Where are they? Are they off delousing something? So I just listened, and by the way they were talking, I was in track while scanned, and there's a contact on there, and I'm like, whoa! And the velocity vector was the longest one I've ever seen, and I went, that thing is moving. And so I took a single target track on it, and I'm like, wow, it's at 55K and it's going Mach 2. And I said, that can only be one of just very few things less than fingers on your hand. That either has to be the Concorde, or it has to be an SR-71, or it has to be a Foxbat. And we knew the Iraqis had Foxbats.
You get the vector. Track while scan is the money mode of the F-14, the AUG-9's track 24, shoot at 6 mode. Up high, long velocity vector. That's kind of what the Tomcat was built to find. Strategic bombers flying at high altitude, not that fast though. So you mentioned that it could only be a few things. Was Concorde, because you rattled off Concorde SR-71, was that truly what you thought it might be right at the outset?
Well, it's kind of funny because my mind was working in overspeed. And first I told them, I said, hey, we are in a position to intercept, because I knew that launching DLI, it was going to take them a while to get up there. And I said, we're almost there. We're going to see this thing in a few seconds. And so I told him what my contact was, bearing range. And he goes, that's your bogey. And I went, Judy, if a RIO has the contact, like when someone's controlling you and they give you a contact, and then you have the contact and you're taking control of the intercept, you say Judy. It basically means shut up, leave me alone. And then you take over. And I heard someone else, which I took to be a surface ship, said birds are on the rail. In those days, in 1990, most of the ships, the majority still had rails, and the missiles had to come out of the magazine and go up on the rails. And they only did that if they were about to shoot. And I heard them say birds on the rail. And I said, oh, right away. I said, they think they're going to shoot somebody. And so that's when I went, wow, what is this? And I should mention, even though we had a no notice deployment, I always had a lot of aviation magazines and books. So I grabbed whatever could fit into my sea bag. And I remember I grabbed the latest issue of Air Enthusiast, a British magazine, which always had interesting stories. I mainly like military aircraft, but as you know, when you cross the pond, there's a lot of boring moments. And I ended up reading stuff I normally wouldn't read. And I ended up reading an article on the Concorde. It talked about, hey, it's so great, it's so fast, it can just cruise at Mach 2 all day long, up at between 55 and 60,000 feet. So that stuck in my head, going, wow, pretty impressive. And then it started saying that once they started flying, people started complaining about the sonic booms. So they had to adjust the routes to have the minimum footprint. It didn't make sense to fly less than supersonic. That's where it got its best performance. But they started doing routes, and it said one of their money routes was London to Bahrain, and they could fly it straight down the Mediterranean without any noise problems. And then they'd cross the desert at the eastern end of the Med, come down into the Red Sea about midway down, and then turn east across Saudi Arabia and then land in Bahrain. So that stuck in my mind. So right away I went, well, that's where the Concorde flies. So, and it said they flew that route once a week, but Stu didn't say anything about that. And I said, I wonder if that's in their software. But all this was going very fast in my mind, going, hey, am I going to have to engage this thing, or am I just going to intercept it? So everything I did, I considered, how do I optimize a weapon solution in case they want me to shoot, in case this thing's about to target something, or how do I just intercept it and ID it? Because 55,000 feet's pretty high up there, and we're at 20,000 feet. And I said, okay, this is either going to be a white airplane, and that means it's a Concorde. If it's a black airplane, that means it's an SR-71 Blackbird. If it's gray, that's a Foxbat. And it had we could see it by now. We could see the contrail, but we couldn't see the airplane. I mean, it was a big contrail. So I was starting to lean towards Concorde just because of all the other things, but I still didn't know. And I certainly didn't want to take a missile, but I didn't want it to become an international incident if we fired early. And even though we have TCS, which is television camera set on the nose of the Tomcat, you got to be pretty much looking at the airplane, pointed towards it. And we were pointed, a good 40, 50 degrees to the left, as far as we could go to the left to use geometry with the radar, with it sitting on the right hand limit of the radar, if that makes sense.
Let's back up a little bit. So you mentioned he's up at 50 some thousand feet. You guys are down at 20. You can see from the velocity vector of the track while scan track, he's going Mach 2. You get a PDSTT single target track. And so what is range to the bogey at when you first got that PDSTT?
We were 60 miles away. And I mean, there was so much Doppler, as you know, the track while scan loves Doppler. And so it was no surprise to me that with that kind of velocity vector on it, it was the pulse Doppler single target track, PDST. It just went, it's like fishing and you hear the fishing pole get a strike. It goes thunk.
What's the geometry though? Is he head on, or you said 50 degrees? Is that 50 degrees off the nose?
When we first got him, I don't know if you can see my hands. So he's coming down the north, and we're like this. And he's so far off here, but he's going so fast that we didn't want to do a pure intercept. I went, I got to use geometry. So I'm going to move him from we're looking right at him, but I knew that's not a good aspect. We turned like this so that we could use geometry to close, because we knew that, hey, we had plenty of gas. I knew we had at least 10,000 pounds of gas. I said, but that's going to be nothing. As you know, if we had to go zone 5, we're going to burn 3,000 pounds a minute. And we can't do sustained Mach 2. In fact, we were limited to Mach 1.8 those days. But that's just an ATOPS limit. That doesn't mean we had to honor it necessarily. So I said, we can just use geometry, and I told him to just gently climb, because I didn't want to go above 30,000 feet, because as you know, the Tomcat's engines, the TF-30s that were in the F-14A, didn't work that well up above 30,000 feet.
Yeah, so the AUG-9 would give you the geometry for steering. Like you said, you're going lead pursuit to affect the intercept, but he's going Mach 2. There's no way that you're going to be able to go Mach 2, even if you get up there to his altitude, at least not for very long. So this is a challenge to affect this intercept.
Right. And I still, like I had said earlier, I still wanted to keep the possibility, if they just said red and free and they wanted me to shoot, I would have to turn my nose right back into him or accept whatever. The AUG-9 is going to tell you where to be. It's going to give you the little dot, as we called it, to tell you where your optimum shot is, within range. And it loves Doppler. And the AIM-54, the altitude difference, that's why I knew we didn't have to climb, because the Phoenix is going to do all the work and get up there. The Phoenix easily, in its max range shots, gets above 100,000 feet. So 55K is nothing to the AIM-54. So that was the missile to have. Sparrow would have never had a chance, because we did do those type, not Concorde necessary, but you had to practice against the beast back in those days was the AS6 that the backfire could carry. And if you didn't get the backfire, which was supersonic, if you couldn't kill him and he got let loose the AS6, you'd practice, and you had such a narrow little window to hit that thing. You really had to watch the intercept geometry really closely. So everything I was doing was something I had learned, in the rag, but I was throwing in. I was giving Jasper where I wanted him to put the nose to do a visual, old school intercept, because I could see the airplane. I could see where we needed to be, because I also wanted to say I need to get as close as I can so we can see what this is and either confirm it's a Concorde and get everybody to stand down. And then I remembered I always fly with cameras day and night, and I don't always carry a big lens, but this day I had carried my big boy, my 300 millimeter lens that I don't necessarily carry. I usually like to have a zoom lens that was 35 to 105.
Yeah, because the TCS resolution, as you've said, you got a good TCS lock, but you cannot tell what kind of airplane it is. So here's an image you took with your own camera using that lens, and it's still kind of hard to tell what kind of airplane it is. So at what point were you like, oh, this is definitely a Concorde?
Well, when I pulled the lens up and I could see the contrail right away, and I had to turn the lens, and it was so cool as I turned it into focus and adjusted the focus, there was this beautiful white silhouette out in front of the contrail, and it's too bad. It might have been because of the vibration that this isn't crystal clear, but it was to my eye. I could see, wow, that's the Concorde. And then I remember saying it 3 times to the ship because I wanted to make sure everybody knew what a Concorde was. That because I knew everybody's voice was just in high warble, that they were so concerned, and so after 3 times, I could tell that they were like, okay, okay. Um, and then they came back and said warning yellow, weapons tight. So I knew, okay, they're standing down.
And at that point, you broke off the intercept.
Well, we stayed below it, but boy, he was smoking. I mean, he was just like watching an airline where, I mean, he was so fast. It was just really kind of cool watching him go over. And I remember afterwards, I took the article down to show Stu what it was, that say, hey, they have this weekly route. He's going to be here next week too, and then I took it to the intel officer, because the intel officer, good friend of mine, but they always they're told in Air Force intel school never to look at a commercial publication because it's called hearsay, that it could be somebody trying to plant false information. So I remember my first intel officer in 102, I brought my pubs in the ready room to show him that some of his pictures were wrong. He goes, "That's hearsay." You know, we get all our information from Denver. And I said, "Well, Denver's wrong." I finally had to go to the CAG, the Air Wing Commander's intel officer, and said, "You got some slides that are wrong. I know my aircraft, and some of these are wrong, even though they came from there." And he was like, "Oh yeah, you're right."
Your extracurricular research saved the day in this case, obviously. Fog of war is a real thing. We've documented it in a couple of episodes on the channel, thinking particularly of Smoke Dorsey when he was in VF 74 shooting down the Air Force Phantom during an exercise. Thinking of most recently Gettysburg, the cruiser shooting down the Super Hornet as it was returning to Truman. So, and you mentioned Vincennes. So all of this is the perception of the TAOs and the folks with their fingers on triggers was that they were under attack. And you could see how the scene was set in this circumstance by the Stark attack and just the vibe in the Red Sea. And this is the nature of working in the littorals like the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf with multiple carriers. Delousing is really hard in those environments. So it does take somebody like you who has big picture SA to go to sort of break the fever, as it were, and go, okay, hold it. Hey, everybody, like you say, key the radio. It's a Concorde. You didn't know what airline. It could have been Air France. It could have been BAE. I think later you found out it was BAE that was flying that route, like you said, from Heathrow to Bahrain. But absent your SA, this could have gone very badly.
It was that close. It and it was just such a dilemma because I'm like, well, I don't want it to be a tragedy, but I don't want to be so scared and ignore that there really is a threat there, which there could have been if it was a Foxbat and they had put an air-to-surface weapon on it. Which, if they could do it on a Falcon 50, they could easily do it on a Foxbat.
Hey, Joe is quite the historian. This is his latest effort, Half Century Baby, 50 Years of the F-14 Tomcat. Very cool book, full of incredible orthographic projections and all kinds of history. I will put the link on how to get this book in the episode description. So, hey, Joe, thank you for sharing this awesome story with us today. And I look forward to seeing you again in real life before too long.
Always a pleasure. Oh, absolute pleasure.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.